you get these movies and like they're funny and there's like good action and there's like interesting characters and there's some character growth. And if you can hit all those notes and put them all together, to me, that's the magic, right? That's what I love. And I'm trying to get all those elements in.
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I'll be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Welcome to episode 11 of the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Happy you can join me today. If you enjoy a good Marvel movie or a fun space adventure, then this is an interview that you're not going to want to miss. As well, if you're a writer who, like me, has maybe gotten a bit of a later start in your writing career than some of those you see dancing on TikTok, then you might also find some good inspiration here. My guest today is a lifelong fan of superheroes, and like many of us, he grew up loving comic books and imagining the worlds that they inhabit. JCM Berne is the author of Wistful Ascending and the Hybrid Helix series, which is an homage to the comic books that he's loved reading his entire life, as well as to the genre of science fiction. The result we get is superheroes in space. His works, of course, have been compared to the familiar Guardians of the Galaxy, but JCM draws his inspiration from a variety of the science fiction that he's consumed throughout his life. This is a fun interview. Joe and I had a great time and a great chat. I know that you're going to love it. It is a bit longer of an interview today, so I'm going to keep my personal update short. The only thing that I'm going to mention is that today, October 3rd, the day the podcast episode goes out, is the release day for Chimera. If you are watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can see the cover that I'm holding up. Chimera is the second book in my Fractured Orbit series. The first book was titled Eclipse, which of course is my poster behind me here. If you're a fan of space adventures, it is one you might want to check out. It's been compared to everything from Firefly to Star Trek. If you're a fan of Red Rising, it's something you might want to check out. And as one reviewer recently said, it was comparable to The Hunger Games meets The Expanse. So if that sounds of interest to you, then definitely check it out. It's available on ebook through Amazon and paperback and hardcover through most online retailers. Also, of course, if you haven't checked out the first book in the series titled Eclipse, you're going to want to read that one first. I will also mention, if you're watching this on YouTube, please take a quick second to like this video and hit subscribe to my channel. It really will help me reach a wider audience. If you're listening on a podcast app, please follow the show there and leave a review or rating. That will also go a long way in helping me get the word out about the show. Larger numbers will also help me attract some larger authors, and I'd love to be able to bring a few bigger authors on the show in order to help boost the audience of some of the newer writers looking for some exposure. But, all right, I promise to keep this short, so I will read JCM Berne's bio, and we will get started. JCM Berne codes by day. By night, he retreats to his secret lair and fights the deconstruction of the superhero genre by writing stories where the heroes are trying to do the right thing and, for the most part, succeed. He spends far too much time on Twitter, Discord, and Instagram, whispering to himself that scrolling through one more set of pictures of expensive watches will somehow further his writing career. Let's get on with the interview. All right, well, welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am really excited to have my guest here today, JCM Berne. Welcome, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Herman. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I am doing fantastic. I am glad we can make this work. I know we had some scheduling difficulties the last time we tried to get together here, but we
very generous description of what happened, which was I got sick and I couldn't talk, and you gave me an extension. I feel like a college professor. You can turn paper late. I don't have a voice, so thank you for that.
Yes.
For that.
No problem. Some may not be aware that speaking is a good thing to be capable of doing while you're being
on
interviewed on a podcast.
On a podcast, yeah.
So, not a problem at all. Thankfully, I record these well in advance for that sort of situation. So
good.
It was not a problem on my end.
Nice.
So for those of you that don't know, JCM Berne is the author of several science fiction books, the Wistful Ascending book and the Helix Hybrid series being his most popular and most recent, and the author of the first science fiction book that I've read, and probably the only one that I've read that has mentioned Tim Hortons. So I will let him talk a little bit more about that.
That's not a plus for me. That's a minus for all other science fiction writers. Everyone should talk about Tim Hortons more.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those references that caught me off guard when I was listening to the audiobook of Wistful Ascending.
So I lived. We were talking earlier. I lived near Canada. I lived in the Buffalo area. I went there for college, and I just stayed there for a while after. So I lived near Canada for a long time. And Western New York has a very Canadian influenced culture for obvious reasons. You're right there. So we had Tim Hortons in Western New York. So I was familiar with Canadian stuff. And then there's like the stereotypes, like they like hockey, which is fair. They really do, right? Yes. You guys really do like hockey, quite generally speaking.
Big part of the culture. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a stereotype, but it's true. So I guess it's probably another word for that. And then so I made the character Canadian, but he's Canadian in a sort of unimportant way. Like there's nothing really vital about his personality that's uniquely Canadian, right? Mm-hmm. But he has to be from somewhere. So I'm going to make him from, and I really do. I think I wrote it at the spur of the moment because someone was saying how he was very polite, and he's like, well, I am Canadian, because that's the stereotype again, that Canadians are very nice, which I don't know if that's actually true. Every Canadian I've known has been nice, but I don't know I haven't done a study to determine the veracity of this.
Right. It's like anywhere else. We've got rude Canadians as well, of course, right?
Yeah.
So that's
it's that observational bias, right? You meet a nice Canadian, like, oh, see, they're all like that, even though you just only noticed it because the person. It's just like in Buffalo, we always thought everyone always thought Canadians were bad drivers. And it's confirmation bias, right?
That's
every time someone cuts you
off,
right? Every time someone cuts you off and you notice the Canadian license plate, it reinforces this thing. If someone doesn't cut you off and they have a Canadian license plate, you just don't see the license plate.
That's right.
You don't pay attention to it. So it's confirmation bias. Little psychology lesson there. You're welcome to all the listeners. There, you learned something. Maybe you didn't learn. I don't know.
Yes. But it definitely caught my attention in the book because, like, most of my listeners probably know by now, I am Canadian. So once there's a Canadian character, it piques my interest, and then
I've had a few readers get excited when they found out that my main character is half Telugu. I know a couple people are like, well, I'm Telugu, I should really read this book, and I'm like, okay, like that's like it's not why I did it, but if that makes you buy the book, I'll take your 33 cents. Or whatever, happily, or 34, whatever it is.
Yes, whatever it is these days.
Whatever it is, 35 cents.
Very cool, Joe. Well, let's back up a bit.
Yes.
Why don't you let people know and let us know a little bit about who you are and your writing journey and what brought you to this point where you are now.
I'm a code monkey, right? I read software for the financial industry. It's a great job, but I think I reached a point at my job where I kind of realized this is what I'm going to be doing until I retire, and it's very sort of straightforward. It's somewhat challenging, but like I wasn't going to move up or do anything really significantly different, probably. And I've always liked writing. I've written novels before, like over decades. I've written several novels that have really not gone anywhere, which is fine. But so I decided to give it another try. So in about 2019, I had some free time had opened up, and I said, let me, and I'm always inspired by the same sort of thing. I'm always inspired to write by, I'll be consuming some kind of media that I love, like a book, a movie, a cartoon, it could be anything. And there's something about it that I wish were different. And I don't mean to say it's a flaw, but like, Conan is cool, man. But man, if Conan knew karate, that would be even better. This is when I was 10 or 9 or something like that. Right? Gotcha. I could improve Conan, right? So there's always something like I want to do. It's almost like fanfic, right? It's the same kind of, I think, motivation. So this was in a way Invincible fanfic for the comic Invincible, which is also an Amazon cartoon, which I highly recommend anybody. It's a really good show. Anyway, and there was something about it that bugged me. I was like, I would change this aspect of it, or these, and then it grew from there. So I wrote it, and I promised myself, look, I said to myself, Self, if you finish this book, you will publish it, come hell or high water. This wasn't possible. Last time I read a novel was like 2006. You really couldn't put it on, like, ebooks didn't exist. The Kindle ecosystem wasn't there. Self-publishing meant printing 10,000 copies and selling them out of the trunk of your car. Cons. I wasn't
Yes.
ready for that. But self-publishing today requires almost no upfront costs. You can really put something on Amazon you can put something semi-decent up on Amazon for a few $100s. You can put it
Hmm.
up even cheaper.
Yeah,
Question, how good a cover you want. So
that's right.
I was like, I'm just going to do it. So I did, and I got enough positive feedback that I decided I can actually make a go at doing this right. So
Cool.
then I hired an editor and I started taking classes in writing and I started like polishing my craft and really learning and paying attention to what I was doing, getting in a writing group. I rewrote Wistful Ascending and I've been going ever since. So my fourth book
Wonderful.
just came out yesterday. The fourth book in the Hybrid Helix,
Nice.
Shadow of Hyperion. Man punching dinosaurs on the cover. It's very striking. You won't not
Yeah,
notice it. If you see the
that's
cover,
right.
you'll remember it. And my
And
fifth
congratulations, by the way,
Thank you,
on
thank you.
that on
Yeah,
your
it's very.
release.
It went really nicely. People seem to be excited about it. It was very exciting.
Hmm.
Got some reviews coming in already. People are reading it. That's the beauty of Kindle Unlimited, right? You can see the page reads ticking, so you can recycle your Kindle Unlimited page. People are reading the. I know they're reading it, so they
Yeah,
weren't reading it. If they just bought it, it wouldn't roll on Kindle
that's right.
Unlimited.
That's right.
So people are actually reading it, so it's exciting. And I got some reviews. People seem to like it. It's always stressful, when you have a series, because you get people who really love like book 3. Like, well, book 4 is not the same. So are people going to
Okay.
like it a little more? They like it less. It's like
Yeah.
everyone's different, right? Not everyone liked it more, but enough people liked it enough that I feel pretty good. And I have a fantasy novel I wrote when I got bounced out of Spiffbo last year, and that's going to be coming out in the next 2 months, probably
Okay.
late October, early November. And that's a straight kung fu wuxia magical kung fu woman. More dinosaurs. I got more dinosaurs in there. And it really should have come out 8 months ago, but I just timed things wrong with editing. My fault
Okay.
entirely with getting the covers done. I just screwed everything up. So they're coming out much closer together. Really, the fantasy should have come out like 6 months before, but it just didn't work. But
Yeah,
uh,
that's
I think people will like it. It's about a mom, ripping apart a continent to get her kids back. It's like Taken and John Wick, but set on Cradle and starring an
oh,
Asian woman. So people seem
interesting.
to they like the pitch. Wistful Ascending is really hard to pitch. Well,
Right.
you said you
Right.
listened to it, but it's very
Yes.
hard for me to explain in a sentence what that book
Yeah.
is about. It has a weird kind of structure. So I find it, and
Definitely.
maybe I'm just dumb, but I find it really hard to pitch. Right? I can't say it's just like X-Men meets Harry Potter. I can't, I
Yeah.
can't find a comp that really works.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can
So
jump. Let's jump ahead a little bit and talk about that. I'll have some more questions in between that we'll kind of work in. That's all good.
shoot,
Wistful Ascending. Yeah. So when I started looking at it and reading the reviews, there was a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy meets Deep Space Nine, which I think is true. I would say the first 80% of it really reminded me of something more like Long Journey to a Small Angry Planet. It really had a almost a Becky Chambers vibe to it for the
I have not read
first.
that,
Okay,
but yes,
it's kind
I'm
of a
familiar. More
yeah,
cozy.
it's more cozy until it really isn't. At there's a certain point where it's like, yeah, this isn't cozy. Why don't you explain the plot of it? So I'm not doing that for you. But
I
um,
just said it's so hard to explain, and now you're
yeah,
coming and Joe. But by
well,
the way, explain it briefly. Okay, so
just the set up a plot for us.
the universe is ruled by this like race of like evil people, right? This evil empire, and their shtick is they're not like anything super special, but when they have kids, they're kids with other races. The children have like super like civilization ending level, like Superman level, like take on armies with their bare hands level superpowers. So they go around, they have kids, they basically like brainwash these kids into working for them, and recruit them into the army, and they control the galaxy this way. Right? It's a little you'll see the roots if you've seen Invincible, you'll see the some similarities. It's not the same, but it's similar. Um, and then Rohan is this one character. He's from Earth. So one of the places they do this is basically an analog of today's Earth. It's very similar to today's Earth, except with superpower heroes. It's like what you'd see in the Marvel comics or DC
Right.
comics. Very similar. And this main character is one of these children. So he's got devastating powers, and he's been working for them for this empire presumably. We don't know, but he's not there anymore. He's off in some like out of the way space station, like trying to lead a peace. it's the old trope, right? The retired gunslinger, right? He's trying to live a
Yes.
peaceful life. He tows ships with his hands because he can fly and do that. I always like it when the retired gunslinger uses their superpowers in like some mundane job. Like I
Hmm.
always feel like if you're like the Hulk, you should work in construction.
Right.
Right, the
Yes.
Hulk, you'd be a crane, just like lift stuff up to the tops of.
Yeah.
You'd make
Just live
so
stuff.
much money because those cranes
Yeah.
are expensive, like in a place like New York City, right? There's so much money.
Absolutely.
I don't know why, and there are any supervillains in Marvel Universe. Like you're super strong, you don't have to. Why would you rob a bank?
That's
You
right.
can make $10,000 an hour,
Just live stuff.
like
Yeah.
lifting like steel girders. Why would you steal? It makes anyway. But that's a related point, right?
Yeah.
So so then this is this old, classic. He's in a system that has these wormholes that have been dormant for a long time. One opens, a ship comes through, and they're like, "Could you go take a look because this is really unusual?" And then everything ensues from there. So if you read the plot really carefully, that's the inciting incident. Everything is one way or another related to what happens after the ship comes through, but it's not in the straightforward way where like the ship comes through and they're the enemy and you've got to defeat them at the end of the book. It doesn't have an
Yeah.
someone's. I just read a review or watched a review. A guy named Sam said there's no A plot to this book, and I'm like, that's reasonably fair. Like, and some people don't like that, and I totally understand and respect anyone who's upset by the lack of an A plot, but
Mm.
it's more like a bunch of things happen. And then you get
Yeah.
some inkling into his past. You get some inkling into the setup of there's a lot of world building. Like there's a lot of stuff that I'm hinting at that. Well, now 4 books are out, so people
Hmm.
know like there are payoffs. There are payoffs coming.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can check on me right now, right? When the book came out, it's like, well, is anything going to happen with these little hints? We don't know, but now I
Mm.
can tell you that people can verify. Yes, things happen.
Right.
There's a bunch of characters that he meets, and it's a little bit of I think it's a found family story. He
Yeah.
gets a bunch of, basically he's getting accumulating an array of friends that he's on the station, people that he cares about, that he's defending. And then he's got to, do this thing where, I have these friends, I want to protect them and keep them safe. And that involves sometimes violence. And that's the life I wanted to leave behind. But
Mhm.
if I'm not willing to fight for them, then, everybody's screwed because because as an author, I have to put him in that situation because if he could just live a peaceful life, the book would be boring as heck. Right?
Right.
The retired gunslinger can't just retire.
Yeah. And I
Right?
think that's where the cozy vibe came for
Yeah.
me at the beginning, and partially because I've been doing some cozy reading as
Yeah.
well. But you've got the retired superhero coming to look for a quiet life. You've got the found family. There's a lot of slice of life stuff happening in the first half of the book, but that isn't the entire book. That's the setup for what
Yeah.
happens next, right? So
Yeah. I mean, a different. I mean, look, someone could have written a series that's just a cozy and like little things happen and he fixes them every book, and that
yes,
might be a wonderful series of books for someone to write and for someone else to read. That wasn't
yeah,
really my goal.
right,
My goal was to make the cozy was showing you what he wants, and
yeah,
to a certain extent it's what he earns, when he does, because in a way it's a moral story. It's about morality, or he's trying to do the right thing. And when a guy's trying to do the right thing, I want to see him rewarded for it. I don't
mm,
want him to always be trying to do the right thing and just have the world punish him consistently. So what's but his reward isn't anything dramatic. His reward is a meal with his friends and like some good wine and
right,
some good laughter, and I dribble that in so he gets something back. Everything's about, and I'm not saying the real world is like that, right? Like I'm not saying like, oh, in the real world when you do the right thing you get rewarded, you get what you deserve, like that. But I don't write stories because I'm trying to mimic the real world. The
right.
opposite. I'm trying. Wouldn't this be nice if you did the right thing and you actually got rewarded for it by these nice things that happen? And he doesn't want
Right.
money, or he doesn't want like, what am I going to reward him with? I'm not going to give him a Ferrari. He doesn't care. But he does want this group of people that he can sit around and have a meal with, and they can laugh and tease each other. And so I
Mhm.
try to show that. And people, I don't know how deliberate I was, but people responded a lot. Like a lot of people really they like the meals.
Mhm.
A lot of eating in my books. A lot of
Right.
like drinking coffee and eating. Some people like, maybe there's too some people, certainly there's some people they think it's too much. Like I definitely get that criticism, but I'm like, you know,
It's part
I put it in
it's
there.
part of that slice of life in the setup to you're
Yeah.
showing where Rohan is and what he's doing at
Yeah.
this point and those interactions with other characters. So I think that's important. I want to talk a little bit about superhero fiction in general, though, because it's not a cozy. It is a superhero novel, and I haven't read the sequel, so I don't know quite where you go with it. But how intentional were you in writing a book about a superhero and including tropes about superheroes?
How intentional, very
How intentional?
intentional, right?
Okay.
So it's loosely based on not based, but maybe inspired by the Invincible, the comic. It's not based on, you wouldn't read them and go, this is the same story, but you can see some similarities, even in his power set. His powers are very similar to the main character in the comic Invincible. I like that power. I've always liked that power set, and which I it's purely an aesthetic thing, right? It's like, what do you think is cool, right? Like, I grew up in E. Doc Smith, like big spaceships with like, layers of force fields throwing planets around. Like, I think that's cool, right? Some people
Yeah.
really think like Gandalf facing off the Balrog in a cave. That's cool, right? Some people think like, oh, like a martial, like Bruce Lee, like fighting a bunch of ninja, like in an arena. There's nothing wrong or right about any of these like aesthetic choices about what kind of heroes you like. I like guys who can fly and punch through walls like that. I just think that's not that it's better. It's just, so that's what I wrote, and
Right.
but I think a lot about superheroes. But superheroes are just people with extraordinary powers who are independent costume vigilantes. That's the classic superhero story. Anything
Yeah.
and then things deviate from there, right? Just one level or another. But I feel that's the core of the superhero story. And I really, and what people will tend. So we know the classics. We know what comes along with it, right? They're mostly heroes. They have secret identities. There's all kinds of things that go along with this foundational definition, and then there's lots of stories that take it and they twist, they take away some of the pieces, like Watchmen. Well, in the Watchmen, they're unstable, crazy people, because that's the only, right. So they take away some of the stuff that you see in like the classic Marvel and DC comics, and I was like, I don't want to do a deconstruction. I don't want to take away the typical associations. I want to make my heroes they're dressed in spandex and fight crime, but they really are trying to do the right thing, and they're not insane psychopaths for the most part. Some of
Right.
them are, but most aren't. Um, but the first book doesn't really have a ton of superheroes and costumes in it. It's really Rohan on the station, and then in book two, he goes back to Earth, and there's a lot of characters introduced. Probably too many. A lot of people don't like that because it's
Okay.
more like an Avengers story on book two, where like, but because you're meeting, like, there's like a lot of superheroes on Earth, and you meet a lot of them, and they don't get a lot of page time, most of them, because there's only 400 pages, so I
Right.
can't give them each their own thing. So that you get a much broader sense of the superhero culture on Earth in the second book, and then after that, I leave Earth alone for the most part. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I wasn't trying to tell the classic superhero story follows a format, and I really didn't stick to that because I was a little bored by it, which is, teenager discovers that they have powers and has to cope with juggling high school and their crush and their powers and their supervillain, and that's a very standard
Yeah.
story. And I was like, I was more interested in a grown up because I'm old. Um, I like the idea of, and I like the idea of the post hero's journey hero. I like this idea that he's been on the hero's journey. He did it 10 years ago. This is after that.
Yeah.
He's not there anymore. I think because everyone does a hero's journey. Like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Like, they're
That's
great.
right.
But I'm like, I don't need to do it again. Let me do something a little different. I mean, I'm always trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to do
No.
something different.
Yeah, and I like it though because it's you're subverting that expectation. It's not
Yeah.
the typical superhero origin.
And
You're
people ask, they want like, oh, tell a story about his like first missions for
mm,
the evil empire's military. And I'm like, I mean, I could. I'm probably never going to do that. I don't really think I'm ever going to. He'll say like in conversation, oh, I did this thing, and it'll be like a paragraph. But I don't think I'm going to write a book about like Rohan as a teenager like tearing up New York City. Like,
right.
I'm not interested in that. Maybe not right now. I'm not interested in that story. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows? Pay me
Yeah.
enough. Pay me enough. Tor, Orbit.
See what happens,
If
right?
you want to see a spin-off series, Teenage Rohan, I'll write it. But no.
Right.
So
Did you know going into writing when you were writing Wistful Ascending that you were writing a series, or did you write it as a standalone initially?
no, I wrote it with serious potential in mind from the start.
Hmm.
I did not have an intricate plan for what I wanted to do in the series. I have much more of an idea. I think an ending in mind now that I don't think I had then, but I definitely had that. I wanted to lay the foundation for this for 10 more books. I love this format. First of all, I'm a comic book guy from way back. And comics do that,
Yeah.
right? Like comics by their nature. There's not Superman was never an issue, right? It was
Right.
meant to be a series.
Yeah.
Batman is a ton of stuff, but even in books, I'm a big fan of like Stephen Bruss, the Jarek series. Better known as like Harry Dresden from Jim Butcher.
Okay.
I like this long series of standalone stories. The Pulps did a ton of that. I grew up on John Carter of Mars. I grew up on
Hmm.
Tarzan. I mean, Conan. All these. I like that, and I like it more when there's um, uh, things change, right? I like it more when there's an ongoing story like this. The setting shifts gradually over time. The circumstances change over time. So we're seeing that in my books. Like, you've read one, but by
Yeah.
book four, things have changed, right? Things have happened in the books that the political global circumstances are shifting.
Okay.
And I can see people online like, oh, where's this going? I can tell you, but you don't really you don't want to hear it that way, right? You want to read the books.
Yeah.
So give me time. I'll write the books. You can read the books. But I like that. I really like that. Stephen Bruss does a great job of that with Jarek, Harry Dresden stuff. Harry Dresden in book 17 is not the guy he was in book 3. The
Mm.
setting is not the same. Like the power dynamics are different. He's acquired new relationships, new titles. He's stronger than he was. All this stuff happens, and
Yeah.
I like that. I love this. Immerse myself in a. But it's not one story. It's not Wistful Ascending ends.
Yeah. It
You read
does.
the end. It's like you're done. You should feel like, okay, this book is finished.
Hmm.
But there's more. You may have questions, but the big storylines wrap up
Yeah.
by the end, and every book is like that. So every book wraps up
Okay.
at the end, but you probably should feel like, oh, there's stuff I don't quite fully get. This character is probably going to reappear and cause a problem someday or something.
Hmm.
So, and they will. So I make a lot of little throwaway reference, and it's fun because
Yeah.
there's this payoff you can get when you make like a casual reference in book 1, and then you don't pay it off until book 4. There's like a joy in that
Right.
is I'm trying to find the right word. It's unique, right? You don't get that in a book. A book
That's right.
can't do that. 4 books can do that, right? So you take a 12 book series. I can come back to something in book 11 that I was mentioned in book 3,
Hmm.
and like it's fun for it's fun for a certain kind of reader. Like as a reader,
Yeah.
I love that stuff,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of
I
readers
would
do.
agree.
Not all, but So this is the kind of stuff I really like. So I'm like, the only way to do that is to write 12 books, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Fair enough.
so that was always the plan, but the plan was
Cool.
loose. So people say, how many books are going to be in the series? And I always say 25. I pulled that number out of the air. I
Mm.
have no idea, but
Okay.
there's going to be an end.
Okay.
I will promise everyone there's an end. I have an end in mind. I don't have a step by step chapter outline of how to get from where I am to the end, but I have a
Hmm.
loose idea, and I'll solidify it as time goes on.
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
yeah.
So, and what was I guess, was there an intention for setting the book in space as a setting? Was there a particular reason why you thought superheroes in space would be the way to go with it?
I just always liked it. I mean, I've always liked. There was a comic called The Griffin, came out from DC, maybe early '90s, very early
Okay.
'90s, and they basically recruited heroes from Earth to fight in some interstellar war. So you're seeing how I'm stealing from this heavily. And there was a scene where there's like an armada like facing off the Earth, and the guy's like, "No, don't threaten my planet," and he flies up and punches the ships, and I just thought that was so cool. I love that. And it's whatever imagery, like it'll either resonate you or it won't. Like I can't
Yeah.
explain it. If you think that's cool, you think that. If you don't, I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you. But I love
Right.
that. So I always loved that. I love the superheroes in space stuff, like the Jim Starlin comics, like I don't know how much a comic person you are, but like the Thanos, the Infinity Gauntlet, the event, all
Yeah.
that stuff. Like Jim Starlin invented Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet
Mm.
and
Okay.
Warlock. I mean, that stuff comics that came out when I was little. Like I read them in reprints already. Like came out early
Okay.
'70s. I always thought that stuff was just super cool.
Mm.
I'm a big fan of like Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5. I was about to say
Right.
Battlestar Galactica, which I hated. That's a whole different story. I love Babylon
Babylon 5.
5. I,
Right.
I, I like the melting pot space station thing. I just think
Mm-hmm.
it's cool, and it's a more
Yeah.
constrained story. Like it's easier to sort of contain what's happening on a station like by
Yeah.
itself. You got instead of a planet with potentially billions of people, you got a station with a much smaller geography, so it
Mm-hmm.
makes the story a little easier to plot. I don't know. I think that was the gist of it.
Yeah.
A little
Okay.
homage to DS9 and B5, really, because
Love it.
I love the both
Okay.
shows. I love both shows.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah, and definitely, big Star Trek fan myself, and there was definitely you definitely tell the homage to Deep Space Nine,
yeah, yeah,
Wistful
yeah,
Ascending for sure,
yeah,
especially with the wormhole and all that, right?
yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I mean, wormholes have been in so much stuff. Like, I never really think about like people say like, where'd you get that idea from? Like, a bunch of places, right? Like because it's
Right.
also Farscape. Wormholes are such a big part of the
Yeah.
story, and then Deep Space Nine, absolutely. It's actually more like the wormhole in Deep Space Nine because it's got
Hmm.
a fixed, two fixed endpoints, and that's the trick to the.
Yeah.
I mean, but I have five, so five times is good. It's like Deep Space 45, not nine. Um, um, so and I put in five, and like so someday someone's gonna be like, "Did you know from the start where all five would go?" And not a freaking clue. I knew where one was going, but I'm like, let
Yeah.
me put five in just so I have room to
I like it.
maneuver.
Yeah.
And then they opened the second one in book three. That's not really a secret. It
Okay.
happens like the first chapter,
Yeah. Okay.
but there are more, and they'll lead somewhere. I'm gonna open them all, I think.
Right.
So yeah,
I love it. Yep. No, and those ideas, when you're saying you didn't really know where the wormhole came from. I mean, obviously you're a comic book fan and a science fiction fan. Those ideas kind of you know go into your psyche as
yeah,
over the years, especially
yeah,
um, when you get to our ages where you have decades
yeah,
of
yeah,
those influences. It's hard
yeah.
to tell sometimes where those ideas actually came from,
It
right?
does, and sometimes I feel bad because I feel like I'm not giving proper attribution to the creators who I'm stealing from. Because I honestly don't remember. I mean, I've been
Yeah,
reading comics and fantasy and sci-fi heavily, daily, for over 40 years. I don't know where this stuff is in my brain somehow, right? But like, I don't
yeah,
know. So I'm not trying to steal without attribution. I honestly don't remember. But there's all
yeah.
kinds of.
And
Sometimes someone will bring up a story, and I'm like, oh, I took something from that. I forgot. So it's
it's tough too because a lot of those, especially if you're talking 80s and 90s science fiction, they're pulling stuff in from earlier science fiction
oh
from
yeah,
60s, 70s, right?
oh yeah,
That
oh yeah, oh yeah.
we
You
might
can,
not even know about, right?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it becomes it becomes the part of the tropes of science fiction,
Yeah.
right? Wormholes and space stations and all that sort of thing has been part of science fiction for decades.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
yeah, Doctor Who. I steal a lot from Doctor Who. I have these rhino-headed guys who are taken directly from a Doctor Who episode, and I gave him the same name in an early draft, and someone was like, "Dude, you can't, you can't use the same name." Like, are you sure? I'm like, I don't know. Do I know a copyright lawyer? I have cat people in an upcoming book. I want to call them the Kazin, and I'm like, can I get away with that? Is Larry Niven's estate going to come after me? I'm nobody, but I probably won't. I'll probably name something else, but I like naming. Naming is a big uh, like I think a lot about the names of everything that
right.
I
Okay.
use. Like it's always deliberate.
I
I always
like it.
spend a lot of time thinking about it. Almost always. I like coming up with names. I like coming up with chapter titles. There's some very funny chapter titles, and not everyone notices them. But when people do, they're like, "That chapter title's hilarious." I'm like, "Okay, good." Score, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I did notice some of that, and it's easier to pick up when you're listening to the audiobook because it's being read to
Uh,
you. I think if you're reading it, I kind of gloss over the chapter title a little bit, partially
yeah,
because I don't want the spoiler of what's going to happen in the chapter
that's the
sometimes.
trick. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to write a chapter title that's funny when you read the chapter and doesn't spoil it. But yeah,
Yes,
my narrator is great. I really want to get audio done for the second and third books and fourth. It's just a big upfront cost,
it is.
and it's hard to justify from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a mortgage payment.
Yeah, I
That's what
feel
I
you
always.
there.
Yeah.
I
So yeah, yeah,
I have not. I mean, I don't have audiobooks of any of my books for that very reason because it is. I mean, people. I don't think people realize that it's more expensive to publish the audiobook than the book itself.
dramatically.
It is a
Well,
huge and not that not that it's not worth it, but because I mean, there's a lot of hours that go into doing to producing it.
Yes.
But
It's a lot of labor. Like in that sense,
yes,
these guys totally earn their pay,
yes,
but that doesn't mean it's going to earn out for
earn
me
out. Yes,
on
that's right.
the business end. So when I say it may not be worth it, I totally don't mean that Wayne's labor wasn't worth the cost. It totally
Right.
was. He's a fantastic narrator. I love Wayne, but it's kind of justified from a business perspective.
Yeah, sorry, and I didn't mean to
Yeah.
imply
Yeah,
that
no,
that's
no,
what
I
you're saying
know you
either.
didn't, but like I'm always a little like because I complain a lot about how expensive audio is, but it's not that it's not worth it. It's just like it is worth it, but it's still
It's
expensive.
yeah, the cost is
Yeah,
justified, but it's also from a business perspective not
yeah.
justified.
Same with
And
good art.
always,
My
yeah,
covers aren't cheap. Chris
yeah.
McGrath is very good, but they're gorgeous. I'm like every book. Part of me is like I should really just get a cheaper cover artist, but then I see the one he does, and I'm like, oh, forget it. I'm just gonna spend the money. I'm just
A
gonna
good
bite the
cover's
bullet.
worthwhile, absolutely.
Yeah.
And your covers have the classic, have that classic sci-fi comic feel to it too, which I think
We
makes them so important to your books and to the genre that you're writing.
Yeah, Chris is great. I really need a very good artist because I am not the kind of writer who can articulate what a good cover should look like. I know other people are. I know a guy, Michael Michelle, who I actually roomed with at DragonCon. He like posed for his
Okay.
cover. He like put on like a
Oh,
sweatshirt
oh, really?
and like
Oh,
sent photo like this is exactly what I want. I'm like I can't do that. I have no idea what I want. I know it when I see it, right?
yeah.
So I just give Chris stuff like, dude, punching dinosaurs. Think Frazetta, and he comes up with an amazing cover like in the
Mm,
jungle, and I'm like that's the best I can do. So I just have to find an artist I really trust, and Chris is that guy because not
yeah.
all his
Cool.
covers have the same vibe, but that Frazetta painted vibe, he got really good at putting that in, and I'm super happy with this. I mean I love the covers. The cover for yeah, I like the cover for book one a lot, but the cover for book two blew me away, and everyone since then has just blown me away.
Mm.
Two's got the giant shark, which is just a ridiculous storyline, but uh, I told Chris like giant sharks. He's like, so this is like silly, like it's goofy, right? I'm like, no, the sharks are played totally straight. And he's like, really? I'm like, trust me. And they are. They're not meant to be funny at all. Like there's no humor in those giant sharks.
Mm.
But that's my brand. I take things that sound ridiculous and I play them
Yeah.
totally straight
Right.
and
Like
and pull them off. The
right.
bears
Like space
and
bears. Yes.
Space Bears. People think it's like really goofy, and I'm like, I don't know, they're not really that. They're a little bit, but everyone loves the Bears. I don't know why exactly. I wish I could capture that because people like really get excited about them and like talk about the Bears. I'm like, I really didn't
Yeah.
mean for them to be anywhere past chapter 3 when I first
Mm.
when I first plotted this. They were meant to be a throwaway, like species and
Right.
one and done, and never met maybe mentioned again, but briefly. And
Mm.
instead, they become like a key to the whole storyline. So it's like, all right,
And
sometimes you get lucky.
yeah, I think it's something. I think for me at least with the Bears is it's some one you named them perfectly.
Thank
You're
you.
talking about naming things. I
Yeah,
mean, and two. I mean, it's something that's completely unique. It's not anything that I can think of from any other science fiction or superhero book.
anime does it a ton.
And
Anime
it's
has
yeah, that's true.
anthropomorphic
That's true.
characters a ton. That's where I got it from.
That's that's true.
That's where I
Um,
took it from.
okay, okay. But it's also easy to visualize. It's
Yeah,
when you're talking
yeah.
about an alien that is nothing like we've ever seen. It is hard to visualize that,
I
but
have one.
I can visualize a bear.
Yeah, right. I have,
Right?
and
So
we've seen so many cartoons with bears. The idea of a bear like talking and interacting with people isn't that strange because we've seen it
right.
in like like Winnie the Pooh. We've seen that so much. It's very easy to accept. I have like
Hmm.
one alien that you can't see, right? The fourth dimensional, oozing in and out of reality stuff, and she's just a chef. She's the line cook at Pop's coffee
Hmm.
house or house of breakfast, I think. And you can do one, but you don't want too many of them. It's like, all right, another character I can't picture. You don't need that. So
Right.
I like how I like my aliens to be very. They're mostly very similar to humans. It's like they're human, but with like a green skin and antennae, and that you can picture that because we've all
Yeah.
seen Star Trek and Star Wars, right? I don't want to go too crazy with any of it. And there's a world building reason they all look similar that you discover as
It.
time goes on. It's not that I
Yeah.
don't understand evolution. Someone accused me of that in one of the
Oh,
reviews.
really?
They're like, "Oh, it's so dumb how all the aliens can like eat the same food and like," and I'm like, "There's no, I'm not. It's not a
It's
bug. It's a feature, right? You're
yeah,
supposed to go. How come they all breathe the same air and like eat the same stuff? That doesn't make any sense. There must be a connection there historically, and there is. And I explain
yeah,
it in later books. Like it's
and
not a
you
mistake.
and it's hinted at in the first book as well. I did
Yeah,
catch
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
it's
it's.
not
I don't spend a lot
that's
of
not
time on
out
it.
of the blue.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it
Ben
was
Stone
there,
makes a reference to it, but I don't. I'm not a big info dump guy. Like I really try
right?
to avoid that.
And
So
that's
it's a lot of stuff I think like that. Like Ben makes a quick comment about that. That's meant to be picked up by someone who cares about that detail. You
mhm,
also have to understand when you're writing sci-fi. When you're writing sci-fi superhero action stories, many of your readers don't. Right? Like this idea that like everybody cares about why these aliens can breed. Right? Most people
right.
don't. Like
Yeah,
you have readers who really it will really bother them if it's not explained. But you
yeah,
have a lot of readers like, oh, they're all drinking the same stuff. That's fantastic. I don't
right.
really
Yeah,
care. And you don't want to overburden, right? Spend all this time talking about the reasons, because then the
yeah,
people who don't care is going to be like, I'm bored, right?
yeah.
And you're
That's
just
right.
then you're pandering to the seven people who want the biology of it, you know.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you're writing, and like you said, you're writing a science fiction superhero fantasy
yeah,
story. People aren't
yeah.
expecting hard science fiction,
They shouldn't
right?
be.
You're
I
not
mean,
expecting The Martian,
it's
and then
hard.
they
It's
pick
harder.
that up.
It's harder than I mean, like the you know, it's harder science. It's harder science than I think people usually give me credit for. Partially because I don't explain a lot of the hard stuff, right? But like the advanced technology is pretty limited. You know, they have artificial gravity, which makes no sense.
Yeah,
But that there's not a lot of the advanced stuff they do is magic. Like interstellar travel, the wormholes are created by magic,
mhm,
not by tech. So
yeah,
it's that, you know, I just have a lot of magic thrown in there, but it's explicit. Um, and then I don't spend a lot of time trying to explain to people that I figured out like where the food came from, because most people don't care. But I mean, I thought
mhm,
about it. There's
yeah,
hints, but then you know, like I said, I'm not writing The Martian, so I'm not going to
yeah,
spend page after page
yeah,
going on about what a bootstrap drive is, which is just, you know, I
yeah,
think sci-fi people will sort of figure out what a bootstrap drive is. You know, that it's just a
mhm,
little project a little gravitational source in front of you and it pulls you along,
yeah,
right?
right,
Bootstrap, right?
yeah,
But I don't ever say that in the book. You know, like
yeah, right. And a conversation that I think I've had with every science fiction author I've spoken to on the show so far is, sci-fi is, I think, a difficult genre, whether you're on the fantasy end of it or the hard sci-fi end of it, as far as reviews go, because you're always going to have someone that says this isn't going to work this way. They want the hard science, and then you're going to have someone on the other end of the spectrum that says this was too hard on board, and it's trying to find, picking the lane that you want to be in with how hard you want your science fiction and how hard you want to explain it, and
yeah.
not worrying about
But
the
see,
audience that's not intended for.
I very much unintentionally avoided most of that. And you can see what I did by just look over your head at the cover of your book. Looking at that, I could expect like serious science in there. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the cover of Wistful Ascending, it's a guy flying in space without a helmet, right?
Yes.
If you pick it up, you should not be expecting all the I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. Whereas if I look
Yeah.
at your cover, those many readers would, right? You
Right.
know, for
Yeah.
better, for better or for worse. So I avoid some of the worst. I don't think too many people come into it expecting it to be super hard sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I avoided some of that end of it. And then I try to make it very explicit that like Rohan's powers are not scientific. They're not
Mm-hmm.
biological. He has magical power. You know, it's like don't try to like figure out. But if these were implants, they would use up this much energy, and where would the batteries be? And you're like, no. That's you know not what's
Yeah.
happening. And if someone else wants to do a story like that, those are great stories. It's
Of
just not what I
course.
was. That's not what I was doing. You know,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah. I agree. I loved Project Hail Mary. It's been one of my favorite reads of the year so far. But I don't expect, when I picked up Wistful Ascending, I did not expect it to be Project Hail Mary, where there's no formulas in this book. What's how do they
no
know
math.
how to open the wormhole? I don't
There's no
know.
math.
Yeah, no.
And I'm very I'm very laissez-faire about I'm pretty laissez-faire about distances and stuff. I try to keep acceleration and velocity very distinct, which most people don't get.
Mhm.
He can accelerate and get really, really fast in a vacuum. In an atmosphere, it's like a whole different story. Because I know enough physics to get this stuff. But then I'm like, part of me wanted to figure out where all the wormholes were and figure out the orbital mechanics and figure out exactly how many G's he's capable of in a vacuum. So I figured actual, and then I just said, I'm not going to do any of that. Instead, I'm just going to skip
Right.
all that and give so little detail that no one else can call me on it too hard. Because once you
Right.
say, "Oh, I can accelerate at 12.7 gravities in a vacuum," then now people are taking out
Then you've
the
locked in.
slide rules and they're catching you, you know. And
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to say. I'm going to bypass this
Yeah.
whole problem. So I
I
did.
like it. Yep.
Just
Yep.
lazy.
And it works.
Yeah.
I mean, you do what the story calls for, I think,
Yeah.
and I don't think the story calls for it. So
No.
you're right. Why
Thank
why
you.
make that headache for yourself?
And I've gotten relatively few reviews where they were pissed about that.
Hmm.
People are upset about other stuff, various degrees, but not
Right.
about that. Right? I think again, the guy flying on the cover, you know what you're in for, or you should be.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I got one reviewer who was very upset about how the story degenerated into smut, and I'm like, did we read the same story? Because I don't remember putting I feel like it's a very fade to black kind of book. I
Yeah.
don't even think they kiss on screen, right? And
Yeah. I can't remember, but
how is this? If this is smut, you're living a very protected life.
yes.
But
Yes.
I read all my reviews, which is a terrible, terrible idea. Don't
I'm the
ever
same
do
way.
that.
I'm the
Yeah,
same way. I
I
do it
need
too.
I
They
need to
said they tell
know
me not to, but
every
hey.
single one.
So did you create the world first or the characters first? How did you conceptualize the story? I know you talked a little bit about the inspiration from the Invincibles and that. Um, but when you started the series, at least, because now you have the characters and you kind of have the world as you go into further books. But when you started, did it start with Rohan? Did it start with the world?
First, I wanted globally the setting to be very Marvel Universe like, right? So we have Earth, we have people with advanced tech running around, people with magical powers running around next to each other. So I always liked that. I just did. And then I wanted the story set in space, so not on Earth. So that was again like Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Like
Yeah.
people on Earth aren't flying off in spaceships. There's no spaceport in New York, but the main characters get a ship and they go off and do stuff. And then really the world building started with this conceit of the Eldrach, with the they when they have children, the children have special powers and they control the universe, and then everything spun from there. And then this idea that their kids are the most so my main character had to be one of them, right? And then I could explore all the stuff about broken families and abusive
Mhm.
parenting. Not really abusive parenting, but it's hinted at that they're abusive parents, right? It's not really
Right.
kids aren't abused on the page, but
Yeah.
clearly the parents are manipulative, at the very least,
Right.
right? Um, it's not really a child soldier novel, although it kind
Yeah.
of is, but it's not like the kind where you're going to be teared up afterwards. So yeah, I started with that central conceit and I worked it out from there. And then the whole magic system and stuff and all the way the powers work, it really came about. It goes to me, it's always backwards. You always start with the kinds of scenes you want, right? And the kinds if you want a guy flying through space and punching through the hull of a spaceship, you have to do your magic a certain way. If you want a guy sitting in a room and typing on a keyboard and beaming with his mind code that takes over another ship, that's a very different thing, and that's also
Yeah.
cool, but that's totally different. And
Yeah.
I wanted the guy punching spaceships. I mean, I just that's what I thought was neat.
Right.
So but the world building started with that. I wanted Earth kind of like a Marvel universe or DC universe Earth, and I wanted the Empire the way. And that's all because of Invincible. The specific thing happened in Invincible that made me want this alien race that works. Their biology works this way, and I
Right.
can't always explain it because it's a little bit of a spoiler. But it was something
Okay.
that bothered me in a later volume of Invincible.
Okay.
So when the show catches up to this point, I'll tell everyone exactly what it was that bugged me. But I don't want to spoil it for people now because it's a really good show.
What was the most difficult part of creating the?
I don't think there's any part of the world creation that was difficult, right? I mean, writing is hard. Writing is this putting the stories down. Pacing is really hard, right? Because you've got to do so many different things every chapter you've got to advance like the character arc. You got to make some stuff that's funny. You got to make some stuff that's exciting. You have to have tension. It's like an algebra, like solving multiple equations at once. I always think, and it's just always really tricky. And um, to pull it off, or all the stuff happens throughout, and you're getting these little dribbles. But my editor really wanted me to do a bigger info dump early. I don't know if you remember, but there's a scene early on where he's like explaining the political landscape to Ursula, like in like a page of like just like a page of like questions and answers. Like, oh, and it makes sense in this context of the story. She doesn't know, she's from far away,
Yeah.
but it's an info dump, right? And I'm like, that wasn't in my original draft. I didn't want that in there. I wanted that stuff to all get dribbled in slow.
Yeah.
You have to really read and pay attention and pick it up, but you know. My editor argued with me, and I ended up changing it. And that stuff is much harder, like controlling the flow of information, giving people the stuff they need to know when they need to know it, and not too soon so it feels like a dump, and not too late so they're confused. I didn't want to write Malazan either. I mean, I don't know if you've read Malazan, or I'm sure
No,
Steven Erickson, you've heard of it.
I have, yes.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
But I haven't
So
read it.
it's a famous for this in media res, but to an extreme, right? You're just dumped into this very complex world, and just like you're lost for books, maybe the whole series, because so much is going on and so little of it is explained that people just feel like completely overwhelmed. Sometimes I read 4 or 5 books, I still don't know what the hell's going on. And I'm like, I don't want to do that either. I wanted something a little more accessible. Like, I mean, I love Malazan, don't get me wrong, I love it, but it's very challenging in that, you'll forget like some character, and then they'll go by a different name like 3 books later, and they're super important. Like, oh, it's the same guy, and you like won't notice for like 2 books because you're like, oh yeah, because they're very. Anyways,
I would never remember that.
I highly recommend anyone reading Malazan use the wiki. There's like fan made wikis, and I totally would do that if I was going to read it again. Which I will one day. I'm going to use the wiki because I don't remember everything, but so that stuff was hard. I don't the world building is very straightforward because I didn't put in a crazy amount of detail. Like a lot of it's cheating, right? Like what did I do? I made it. The sector. It's part of the galaxy. How big is it? Oh, who cares, right? It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's 1,000 worlds. Does it actually mean it's 1,000? Do I have them written out? No. Like I don't know how many there, right? And if I need a new race, I just pluck up a new race, and I can almost roll dice, like color, head shape, number of limbs. Oh, I got a new species, and like the idea is it's sort of vaguely homogeneous galaxy. There's it's colonized. It's like our world, except instead of the British, we have the Ildroch. Everyone speaks a common language, right? Everyone has some common cultural touchstones because they've been conquered for a long time. And I'm not defending the British, right? I'm not saying that they were good for the world, but from a world building perspective, having that setting makes it much easier, right?
Yeah.
So it might be terrible. Someone's going to accuse me of being okay with colonialism now. No. I feel my wife's family's from Bangladesh. They're all going to hate me. I'm not defending the British.
No.
But if you're a world builder, it's nice. It's nice to have
makes things easier.
Common language and a big empire running everything makes everything simple. And then there's enough flexibility there that if with 1,000 worlds, if I need I need a new race, I need something to happen to them in the next book, I'll just make one up. Because if you only have 4 and you've listed them, right, and they all have characteristics, and you want to wipe one out, now you're down to 3. But I've got thousands, right? So I can do whatever I want, So it's a lot of, I do a lot of cheating because I really think a lot of that is cheating, and I just come up with stuff, and then once you come up with stuff that's like background, like, oh, and he passed a guy in the hallway and he had like a tail and like four arms or whatever, you can bring back, and then you can mention that race again, like in another hallway, and then you can make them a major feature in like book 7, and people are like, oh, it's like you planned it out all along. Like I didn't plan it, crap. I totally didn't. I just,
I don't know if that's cheating. I think it's just how the process goes. I think that is.
I think some new writers get obsessed with world building, and they want to lay out everything in a big Bible before they start, and that's the mistake to me, or at least it would be a mistake for me. I'll say at least that. If I had sat down and like actually come up with names for these 1,000 planets, that would have been a humongous waste of time, and I'd still be doing that.
That's right.
And I wouldn't have any books out. Instead, I've got 4 books. It's like I think that's better, right?
Agreed.
So,
Absolutely agreed. As you're writing, just to shift topics just a little bit,
Yeah.
as you're writing, how easy do you find it to insert humor? Because you did mention that as part of the pacing. I mean, there's a lot of humor in the book. It's the timing, I think, works very well. How much of that? How difficult is that for you, or is that just your natural cadence and your natural sense of humor?
It's my natural cadence and sense of humor, and it's the opposite of hard. I can't not do it. I have okay, so I've written I have a lot of first chapters that are trunked. Okay, I'm like a guy who's been wanting to be a full-time writer for 25 years. That's not an
Mm-hmm.
exaggeration. I wrote novels in 98 that I thought would break me, get me a tour contract, and I'd be doing cons. That never happened, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's my history. So I have a lot of trunked first chapters, and when I try to write a serious character that's not like quipping, I get bored and I can't I don't have the discipline to write those. I literally
Okay.
can't do it. I literally can't. So, people say, "Was Rohan's sense of humor?" It's exactly my sense of humor, except when I'm talking to you, like we're having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I can't walk away and think for 3 days about my response.
Yes.
What funny thing can I insert in this conversation? When you're
Yeah.
writing, you can go back and this would be funny here, and this would be funny here. You can,
Yeah.
so it's Rohan talks exactly like I would if I had infinite time to contemplate my responses, because I
Mm.
do have infinite time to contemplate his responses, so they're
Yeah.
funnier, right? Than that. But generally speaking, I don't know. There's no craft to my humor. Right? There's craft to other
Yeah.
stuff I do, and
Yeah.
there's things I'm not saying I'm a great writer, but there are things where I studied how to do them. I listened to like Brandon Sanderson's lectures or whatever, and I really thought
Mm-hmm.
about it. I figured out how to do certain things, and I know
Right.
what I'm doing. Like there's a craft to it, right?
Yeah.
I can reproduce certain elements. The humor, I have no idea how to write a joke. Like I've seen people talk about it, like Howard Taylor, who's does like writing excuses with Brandon Sanderson. It's with a podcast they worked on together for
Okay.
many
Yeah.
years. Howard Taylor, he writes a science fiction cartoon, a web comic.
Okay.
Great, seems like a wonderful guy. A lot of good things to say, but he has a craft to writing humor because he was writing a web comic where there's a joke every day for 15 years, and he has all this theory about how to write a joke that lands and how it has to be timed and different kinds of jokes. I don't know any of that. I listened to him talk, and
Right.
I'm like, that sounds great. None of it stuck in my brain. I have no
Mm.
idea how to write a joke. Usually, I'm just making language jokes that appeal to me or funny stuff.
Yeah.
But all the humor is just me coming up with it as I write. None of it's planned, and there's no craft to it. So if someone says like, how do you write a funny joke? I have no idea. I could tell people how to do other things where I have. I mean, I'm not again. I'm not saying I'm a great writer. I know some things about how to write aspects of writing. That's just not one of them.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's all
That's
just
just natural.
yeah, yeah. The dialogue. People say, how do you? Some people like Some people like many people who like the books like the dialogue specifically, and I'm like, that's just how I write. Like that's always just been how I write. I write dialogue like that, and I can't write it any other way. I'm not good enough. And I admire writers who can do different things. Like Stephen Bruss, I keep bringing him up here with the Jerry novels, but he's written books in very different styles that are both good, and like that's amazing to me. But I can't do that.
Yeah.
I've
I
got
hear
the
you.
one, I've got one voice, and if you don't like it, that's I understand, but like that's all I got,
Right.
and
But if you don't have, I find humor difficult to write. It's something because it's something you can't really teach. I do find it difficult. And the sense of humor I find in Wistful Ascending, to me, where the comparisons to Guardians of the Galaxy were, it wasn't just that it was superheroes in space. It's that witty banter. It's that funny back and forth that you find. It's those fast quips that
the quips.
really bring it to life.
I
Yeah.
love the quips. I love the quips. I
Yeah.
love like and that's a very superhero thing, right? I mean, it's not only superheroes, but it's very common. Like the
Yeah.
Spider-Man, the quipping, he's getting punched in the face, and he's like mocking the other guy, and that
Yeah.
banter in the face of imminent doom is just like a really good. People like characters. I like characters like that, so I made a character
Hmm.
like that, right? That's Rohan's defining thing. Like he will keep quipping, even when he
Yes.
shouldn't be, and he knows it, right? And that's just
Yes.
fun. It's a fun
It
character to
is.
write. Uh, uh, or he quips when he's nervous. He quips when he's not nervous. Like that's it's it's very it's not uncommon, right? It's a very
Hmm.
typical thing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I
There's
like doing
definitely
that.
you find that a lot in a lot of the Marvel,
Yeah,
Agents of Shield. I just watched
Yeah,
Thor Ragnarok the other day, and it was in there. You've got those quips, and
I love
the
that
Hulk
movie.
especially in that one has
He's so
got some
good.
funny liners. So yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
this is my friend from work is one of the funniest things I think I've ever seen. When Thor is like, "This is my friend. He's my friend from work,"
yes,
right? Like, and I don't even know why. That's the thing. I don't know why. I don't know why, but it's so funny.
yeah.
If you see Thor: Love and Thunder has, which is a terrible movie,
I
but
haven't
it
seen that
has
one
these.
yet, but
Okay, but it has like I'm not really giving it. It has these goats, these space goats, and they're the funny. They make me laugh so hard I fell out of my chair at the theater, and I don't know why. I can't tell you why it's so funny, but yeah, I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
yeah, yeah.
So
My favorite scene in Thor Ragnarok was actually it's the end. So if you haven't seen it, it's I guess a spoiler, but
you're
where they're
allowed. It's
fighting,
been a while.
yeah, it has been a while. So when they're fighting the guy at the end, and
Yeah.
The Hulk is like, and Thor's telling the Hulk not to go after him, and he's like, "But big monster." And that's not going to make sense to anyone who has not seen Thor Ragnarok.
So
But
good.
it just out of place, funny line. That's
What of the I don't know if it's still there, but at least early on, my blurb on Amazon said like the Thor movie in parentheses the good one.
oh,
My
okay.
that was my blurb. I think I changed it because I've the book's been
Yeah,
out since like
I don't remember that
2020.
line, but
I probably
yeah,
took it out. But I put that was definitely in the original blurb.
love
And the
it.
good one meant Ragnarok and not one, not two, and at the time four hadn't come out. So
Mhm.
so I certainly didn't mean that. But yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's the thing. You get these movies and like they're funny and there's like good action and there's like interesting characters and there's some character growth. And if you can hit all those notes and put them all together, to me that's the magic, right? That's what I loved. And
Yeah.
like Thor: Love and Thunder had all those elements, but it was weighted too heavy on the humor
Mm,
and on the
okay.
silliness, and it wasn't serious enough. It's like they let the director do what he wanted, and I think someone needed to rein him in a little bit because if you rein him in a little bit, he's phenomenal.
Mm,
I can't pronounce this Taika Waititi or something, but but yeah, but that's the magic, and that's what I'm always shooting for, right? I'm trying to get all those elements in. There's some character growth, there's some action, there's some funny stuff tied in with some emotional content, not too
hmm.
much, but some.
Right.
And I throw in some existentialism because I was a philosophy grad student, and I feel like I need to
Oh,
throw in some Sartre in every book.
yeah.
Whether
Okay.
people like it or not, they'll throw in some Sartre. I'm big on a little bit about free will in a little discussion in every book. That's my little spice.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
So
I mean, you've got some humor, you've got some depth, you've got, these are what, creates some of that relatability to characters.
yeah,
They're not just humor, right? They're not just serious. You've got
yeah,
a little bit of everything going on.
that's
So,
yeah.
do you have a favorite character other than Rohan in any of the books, any of the four books?
I don't really think about. I don't like that's like I don't think about it that way. Like who's my favorite character? Probably Ben Stone. I always like Ben Stone because I basically wrote him to be a lot like my dad, who's
Hmm.
deceased. So I'm like, all right, I like him. Tamara's interesting. That's kind of the love interest. Um, I tried to write a believable love interest. Landed with some people and not others. Definitely had some people not liking the romance. Some people really did. I've had both responses, which I always find really interesting. People like, oh, they're acting like teenagers, and I'm like, I based a lot of that on like my relationship with my current wife. So I'm like, I was in my 40s when that happened. I guess I'm a teenager at heart. I don't know. Who's my favorite character? Uh, yeah,
Even if they're
probably
just the most fun to
Pro-
write. I mean, that's
probably
usually what people go
Wistful.
with.
Wistful's always fun to write.
Mm.
People like Wistful a lot because I like writing the non-human characters. People I like writing the artificial intelligences because fundamentally they're not biological. So like every biological thing, you're going to be driven by sort of very foundational psychological principles like hunger, thirst, and stuff. You can't get around that, right? If you're
Hmm.
a meat, you're driven by that, whatever
Yeah.
kind of meat you are. But with an artificial intelligence, presumably it was built, it was designed, and it doesn't have to care about its own self preservation, right? If it's hard coded, right? You
Yeah.
something hurts, you're hard coded to feel pain and not like pain, right? Like I mean, that's just.
Hmm.
But if you were built, you don't. It doesn't have to dislike pain. It could wouldn't be a very good survival characteristic, but you could design one right like that.
Right.
So it's fun because with Wistful, I'm sort of free to make her whatever I want, and make it like a little bit mysterious and like, well, how would you act if you were a space station stuck in this spot for 50,000 years, and that lets me make her like very mysterious
Hmm.
and stuff. So that's fun. But I like them all. There isn't a
Yeah.
character I don't like. I mean, there's some that are more fun than others, but the Ursins are always fun. Except I always feel like I'm going to get their accent wrong.
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay.
I'm sure one day some linguist is going to look at that and actually like look at the way I'm like butchering. Because the thing about people, when people when people speak any language in an incorrect or non-standard way, they do it in a pattern, right? People don't just
Right.
have bad grammar. They
That's
have
right.
grammar that's different than standard grammar, but they follow a different set of rules.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Ursins should speak, with a specific alternate grammar, and I'm sure I screw it up. I don't know how. My
Well.
grammar's not good enough to be sure that I don't. I know. I just strongly suspect that I'm getting it wrong. Where sometimes they do the thing where, this conjunction should they never do that, but they do it in this sense. I'm like, oh, someone's going to catch me, and I'm going to feel
Wow.
bad. I just write them with a terrible Russian accent. That's all I
Right.
do in my mind.
Yeah.
I hear a bad, not a real Russian accent, like someone faking a bad Russian accent, like
Yeah.
trying to do it and doing it badly. That's the Ursins, and that's all I do. So I'm
That's
sure I'm
great.
sure it's wrong.
I wondered how much of that was the writing and how much was the narrator narrating, because it's hard to tell sometimes when you're listening and
The
not seeing how the words are written. So
so
I'm glad that you brought
the
that up.
the Ursins are the writing. A lot of the other accents are Wayne. Like he gave a lot of the aliens like different versions of English accents, like an Irish or a Scottish or whatever, and that's totally him. But the Ursins were definitely me. They definitely are supposed to have bad Russian. And I told him in the pronunciation guide. I'm like, Ursins bad Russian accent. He's like,
Yeah.
okay. So my poor Wayne. He's like he worked so hard on these books because he's got to have like aliens and they have like weird accents, and he's like
Hmm.
he had to switch back and forth because there's a lot of dialogue, right? Like he worked hard on that audiobook, but
Right.
it's his job, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Hey, he definitely did a good job.
yeah,
I really did
but
enjoy the.
but if you read the Ursins, they sound Russian. Like if you
Okay.
read them because of the I don't know. There's a technical word I'm sure for what I did.
What kind of emotional impact do you hope to have on your readers? I know they're fun books, but what do you want your readers walking away from the books feeling?
My primary goal is always fun, right? My primary goal is always, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to read, and there's all kinds of emotional experiences people are looking to have when they read. And I have always been very strongly determined that you should come away from my books feeling good, right? You shouldn't feel like you've just been gut punched and you've been torn apart and put back together. People describe many books like that, like, oh, it's like it shredded me on the inside and then stitched me back up, and now I'm just like, I feel like like that's not what I'm going for. Those are great books like that are great. That was never my goal. So I was always going for you should feel like kind of fun and you should feel intrigued. I was really going for intrigued, right? I was always going for
Mm.
instead of at the middle of the book, the typical emotional arc for the reader of like an action adventure book, right? Is that end of the second act, you're feeling really stressed and tense, and you're
Mm.
really worried. You reach that bottom point, and you're upset. You're like, oh my god, they're in this terrible predicament. How are they going to get out of it? Third act, they get out of it, they win, and oh, thank goodness. You go from this very low feeling to this, and I didn't want that.
Yeah.
I wanted to avoid that whole thing. So my
Okay.
goal was to have much more of what's drawing you through instead of that feeling of tension and being like worried and stressed out. You should be feeling like, oh, I wonder, I'm curious, what's going to happen? How are they getting out of
Mm.
this one? Not that I'm
Mhm.
super worried that Rohan's the strongest guy in the room. He's not really in physical danger a ton, It happens, but not. But you should feel like I'm just curious. Like, ooh, this character was introduced. Where are they going? Why are they there? Who's this guy? Why are these
Mm-hmm.
people angry at this other guy? Like, I want to know. I want to know. I'm curious. It draws you through, almost like a mystery. And I was trying to
Right.
get people to go through that. And I hope at the end of the book, you're like, oh, I feel really satisfied. Many of my questions were answered. Not all of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I hope you get to the end of the book and you're like, something else is going on here. That's been hinted at, and I have some questions I still want answered. I'm satisfied enough, and that's the trick, right? That's always the trick. And I used to kind of joke like that it's mathematical. I'm going to raise 3 questions and answer 2 for the first half of the book or so, and then for the second half of the book or so, I flip it. So I'm answering 3 and raising 2 new ones to drive it through. I never actually like sat there with a spreadsheet and figured any of this out, but
Right.
that's sort of the idea. But at the end of
Yeah.
the book, and then at the end of the book, you leave someone. I need you to want to know more. I don't want you too satisfied, but I don't want you feeling like nothing was answered.
Right.
Unsatisfied, right? So it's like a razor's edge. So I want
Yeah.
you to be like, oh, I feel really good. I feel satisfied. I learn a lot. I know what's happening, but I'm still have some questions, and that
Mm-hmm.
was fun. Like I enjoyed that process. I
Yes.
never felt like there's some tense moments, right? There's some stuff happens in chapter 31. People always DM me when they read chapter. They're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you're doing this to me," because there's some tense stuff, right? You
Yeah.
can't have none of that. It's not a cozy fantasy. My main
No.
character has a history of light genocide. I keep telling people this, and I'm not even
Mm-hmm.
kidding, right? Like
No.
that's a
No.
terrible word, but like, yeah, he's that's not a cozy. This is not Legends and
No.
Lattes, there's Legends and Lattes moments in there, but there's also a
Yeah.
history of genocide. So like, you've got to, you know, respect that. That's the plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to avoid that. Oh my God, things are awful. They're never going to survive. Feeling that you very often get from action stories because it's
Mm-hmm.
very common.
Yes.
That's my least favorite thing. In like martial arts movies tend to do this, especially Asian ones, especially Thai ones. I watch a lot of martial arts movies, and they'll
Okay.
spend the first 2/3 of the movie just making things terrible. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're abusing like animals. So the bad guys are so
Mm-hmm.
bad. So they
Right.
when the heroes win, you feel so good. I guess that's the theory. I hate that. I'm just like,
Yeah.
just make the villains bad, and we get it, and let's see some cool stuff happen.
Right.
Give me the cool
Yes.
stuff. Don't give me the elephants being tortured for 30 minutes. I don't want to see
Yeah.
it.
Right.
I don't want
No.
to see it. So
No.
you won't have that in my books. Like there's a kid in my book, right? Rinth.
Yeah.
Some people like. Oh, he's a cute kid, right? He fulfills a purpose in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a point where after writing the book, I was like, I could have ratcheted up the tension by having like some of Rohan's enemies kidnap the kid,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Hold him hostage. I'm like, ooh,
Right.
really glad I never. And I thought of that. I'm like, I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done that, and I'm really glad I never did. The kid will
Yeah.
never be in danger. I'll tell you, promise you right now. Rinth is
Mm-hmm.
going to be fine. Like, read all the books. I
Yeah.
don't care how many come out. He's not going to be in danger. He's going to be okay.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I don't want you to have that. Oh my God, the 10-year-old's in danger. I'm a
Right.
dad, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. So yeah, so you'll never
Yeah.
have that feeling in the book, like, oh, the 10-year-old's going to die. Like it's not going to happen. 10-year-old's going to be fine.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I like that different approach, and I mean, there's a lot of trend towards dark fantasy and dark
Yeah.
sci-fi and that sort of thing, and I think that's what made the book refreshing is that it's not, like you said, it's not a cozy. It doesn't go all the way
Yeah.
to
No.
you know the slice of life is there, but that's not all it is, and I think it works.
I've had a lot of conversations with grimdark writers, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of interest. Because to me, it's like it takes a little thought to figure out why people like grimdark. I think why people like a romance is sort of obvious. You sort of
Mm-hmm.
relate to characters. They have a happy ending. You feel good. It's very easy to explain. It's harder to explain why people like grimdark. It's explainable, uh,
Yeah.
but it takes a little more of a. You have to think about it a little harder. And but I very much didn't want to write that kind of a book. I was trying to write something. I don't want to say anti grimdark, but definitely not in that corner
Mm-hmm.
of things. Like there's no sexual assault in my books. like I never actually explicitly say like it never happens, but like no one ever refers to it. It never, it's like it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen
Right.
on screen. It's never really going to happen off screen. Is that realistic? It's not. I'm sorry. Like I'm writing a book
Yeah.
where guys fly through space and punch spaceships. I can write a book where people don't get raped
Right.
because I can, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
pretend. And people exploring that have often have good reasons to explore that in fiction. It could be
Absolutely.
super important for survivors. I'm not saying other people shouldn't do it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not. First of all, it's probably not my. I'm not the right person to explore that in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be doing that. But also, like, I'm just not gonna. Like, I'm
Right.
just gonna deliberately chose. I'm like, this is just gonna happen. But I'll also kill millions of people, so I don't know. But they're off. But it's like a cozy mystery, right? Someone could die, but it's not someone you know or care about, right? So like, I'll kill millions of
Right.
people, but
Yeah.
it's off screen and they're just numbers. It's almost it's
Yes.
almost it's almost easier to brutally kill like millions of people is almost less traumatizing than to brutally kill one person you know, right? Or
That's
care
right.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And there's whole, psychological theories around that very principle, isn't there?
I'm sure.
So,
I'm sure.
yeah, I forget. I think there's even a name for it, but I can't think of
I
it
don't know.
off the top of my head. So yeah, it's been a while since I've taken psych classes.
I don't
Um,
remember. Yeah.
so you mentioned the fantasy book that you're working on. You have a whole dozen other more Hybrid Helix books to write. Is there anything else that readers can expect from you in the future that you're working on?
I'm sure I'll come up with some stuff. The fantasy is a standalone. So will I write like depending on how it's received and depending on if I come up with a really good idea for a sequel, because it really is a standalone the way Wistful Ascending was not. Like
Hmm.
the fantasy novel wraps up.
Okay.
I mean, it's got characters who survive, so I can always write another story where they get into another kerfuffle. But it's
Yeah.
not. It's not. It was not written the way Wistful Ascending was, with the intention of lots of open questions that you might want to pursue further. I didn't do that. It's really meant to be a standalone. One day I might think of a sequel. So far, I have not. So it may never happen.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
I mean, I'm a writer. Like ideas are cheap, right? Like we all come up with so many ideas for a good
Yes.
story. I have a whole idea for um, a cultivation. I actually wrote 3 chapters of a cultivation story about a dragon ridden. It's about people that are ridden by tiny dragons.
Hmm.
Everyone thinks I'm kidding, but it's totally serious. So, everyone's done dragon riders, but I'm doing one where the
Yes, the
dragons ride
dragons
them.
are the
The
riders.
dragons ride them.
Yeah.
So they got little dragons on their backs and they run into battle and the
Okay.
dragons help them with magic and stuff. And
Right.
that's actually a pretty good story. I just have to if I had
Yeah.
infinite time, I would finish that book. I
Yeah.
probably will at
Yeah.
some point, but
I hope you
I
do because that sounds really interesting.
but I mean fundamentally I want to release Hybrid Helix books on a pace. Because if I'm going to
Okay.
get to 15 or 20 of them and I'm a 52-year-old man, I can't do one every year and a half because I'll be dead. So so I want to release those. I want to try to get more than one a year out. That's my sort of goal. And then whatever else I can fit in. And I have a day job and like a family. And I mean,
Right.
my kids are more grown. Like my youngest is 15. So like
Yeah.
that's a big reason I write. Like
Okay.
if my youngest was 2, I wouldn't have time,
Yes.
or I'd have
Right.
less time. It'd be much harder. So when
Yeah.
you kids get older, it's easier. Um, So yeah, right now, like immediate future, I don't have any specific plans. Dragon Ridden, I'd like to pump
Right.
out one of these days, but I don't know when. I don't want to promise anything to anybody. And then but I'll have a lot more Hybrid Helix books. I just hired someone to help me with developmental editing at the series level, so I can make
Okay.
sure I'm dribbling out like the overall character changes in the right pace at the series level, which is
Right.
very different challenge,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You don't want this person's attitude towards certain things to shift too early in a 20-book series, but that's a
Hmm.
very different question than whether a book works.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get some help because I got to a point where I'm like, I don't know if I should do this in this book or the next book, and I really got stuck. So I need someone to read these and hear the whole plan. I can bounce ideas off of. So I'm like, I got Sarah Chorn. Sarah Chorn, she wrote Necessity of Rain. She's a phenomenal editor. She edited my fantasy novel, and I was like, could you read the Hybrid Helix, please, and just help me like figure this out? She's like, okay. So she's reading the first 4 now. This poor woman is going to end up reading 5 books of mine in like a 3-month period. I don't know what that's going to do to her. I don't think it's healthy. That's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of bad jokes. It can't be good for her psyche. I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
that's
worried.
great.
But
you know what?
She's an editor.
It is. Yeah, I mean, it's important, I think, to have, once you get to that, 4 or 5 book, and when you're planning a 20 book series, to have someone ensuring that things stay consistent, I feel for me would be, important to have as well. So that's good idea.
Yeah. And pace. I think, consistency and pace is what I'm worried about. I'm worried about, because you want your characters to change, but they can't change too fast or too slow. Yeah. And that's really tricky over multiple novels. And then like each book has to work as its own thing, like on its own ground.
Mm-hmm.
But the shifts have to be, it's just a mess. It makes my head hurt. That was one of the reasons I like this fantasy novel so much. I wrote under 100,000 words, self-contained story, done. And it was just so much easier. It's like, I don't have to think about how does this relate to the next book or the book before? I didn't have to think about any of that. It was done. So it was very refreshing. It was, I wrote it very fast. It was very nice. But now back to the real job, because the Hybrid Helix to me is like the real job. Like, because as I said before, it's hard, but you get these payoffs you can't get in a single book. So, and I'm really enjoying that. People saw it in book 3, people saw it in book 4. It's like, oh, this, I get what you're doing here. You're laying groundwork, and then you're paying off later. It's like, it's very satisfying. So
great, cool, awesome, Joe. Well, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse.
Yes.
Can you tell me about how in a parallel universe, a different choice might have shaped another version of your life?
You asked this question and I thought about it, and then I forgot to think about it enough to come up with a really good answer. I probably should have not gone to philosophy graduate school, and I should have gone to something that would actually make me money instead, like be an engineer or something else that I was actually good at. And then I'd be a much wealthier person right now, and I could have retired and be writing these books full time instead of. I write software, but it was a late life change. When I was in grad school, when I was in college, I was really good at like science, mathy stuff, so I studied philosophy because it was really challenging. It's a really stupid reason to change your major or your career path. Like, that is the dumbest. Looking back, I'm like, wow, that is incredibly stupid. To like say like, wow, I'm really good at this very lucrative thing, but I'm going to do something else instead because it's hard. To challenge myself. No, that is the dumbest possible like way to go about living your life, and I did that, and that it's kind of amazing in a way, like amazingly bad. But and it didn't work out. Clearly, I'm not a philosophy professor anywhere, and if I had like half a brain, 2 brain cells to rub together, I would have done something different and been in a much better financial place. But then you never know, because your life experiences. It's always. I was like, oh, it'd be nice to have more money. On the other hand, I learned a lot of stuff doing weird things that I did. So
right,
weird. Yeah. You have your weird job, and it's like you didn't make very much money, but you learned weird stuff, right?
That's right.
Yeah. You don't know who you'd be without that. Like, I don't know, like if I had I'm prone to arrogance, and if I had gone into a field where I was naturally like apt and like been successful at it, I might be much worse human being. Because that's what happens when you're an arrogant person, and like life doesn't like stomp you down a little bit. You can become a real jerk. I've seen it.
Right.
So I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm less of a jerk because I had crushing life experiences. I don't know. So.
Yes, I guess one of those things we'll never know how other
until you develop that multiverse hopping drive that we need.
Yes.
So we can actually check.
That's right.
That would be a great conclusion to. And by the way, we're going to go there now on this podcast to this other world and check.
And check to see how that actually turned out for you.
How that turned out for you, yes. Like Wayne's World,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Joe. I had a great time chatting with you.
Me too.
And can you let our listeners know where they can find you and how they can get a hold of your books?
Name is JCM Berne, Berne, and you can find all my books on Amazon exclusive. You can go to my website, jcmberne.com. You can find I have a YouTube channel at JCM Berne where I talk about books. I have a little show called Book Burning where I talk about books, movies, and stuff. I don't really review books. I talk about book topics. You can find me at Twitter at JoeBurn1. I tweet a lot. You can find me on Discord. Oh God, I spend too much time on social media. Every time I do one of these, I'm like, I spend too much time on social media. That's the take home here. But my website will lead you to jcmberne.com. Will lead you to everything. And I have a newsletter that no one signs up for, and I never send newsletters, so I don't even know why I'm bothering. But I think authors are supposed to have newsletters, I guess. But mine is useless. That's what they tell us, but no one subscribes to mine. Like, it's in the back of the book. Subscribe to my newsletter. No one does. And if anyone wants, but if you do sign up to the newsletter, you get 2 free short stories, one of which is and one of which is decent. I'd say a 3-star and a 4-star short story. If you think my books are 5 stars, Foreign Powers is a 3-star, and Zero Twist is a 4-star. And if you follow me on Twitter, every once in a while I just post the link to Zero Twist, and you don't have to give me an email or anything. It's a short story about how Rohan met Wei Li, and it's got a fantastic punchline. If the end doesn't make you laugh, then I don't know how to help you. Yeah, that's everything.
Very cool. Very cool, Joe. I had a great time. I will make sure to link all of those in the show notes and help people find you.
Thanks. Sounds good.
Thank you very much, and we will chat with you soon. I hope you enjoyed my interview with JCM Berne. We really had so much fun chatting about his books and his writing process. Please join me next week when I chat with Tatiana Obi. We talk about her upcoming release, Sister Samurai. This is an episode you don't want to miss. I had the privilege of reading an arc of Sister Samurai, and it is unbelievable. Tatiana and I talk about the subgenre of action fantasy, as well as how Tatiana was inspired and empowered to write an anime-style action story with a black female protagonist. It is an inspiring book and a great interview, and I hope you come back to check it out. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.